What is consciousness? Well, that's not something we can easily answer in one video. But in general, consciousness is usually defined as awareness of ourselves and our environment. We can have different states of consciousness, meaning different levels of awareness, and they can occur naturally or be induced by external factors such as drugs or internal factors such as our own mental efforts. These states range from alertness to sleep and everything in between. Alertness is what most people think of when they think about being conscious. When you're alert, you're awake, aware of who you are, where you are, and what's going on in your environment. You can focus your attention, encode information in memory, engage in conversation, all the stuff you normally do when you're awake and aware of the world. So that's alertness. We've all had the experience of daydreaming, or being awake but not really aware of the world around you. Maybe you've had that experience in class or during this video. You may feel more relaxed, but you're not as focused as you are during normal alertness. Daydreaming occurs naturally. Sometimes you'll find yourself daydreaming when you didn't mean to, but some people can induce a similar state through light meditation. And moving into the less conscious states of consciousness, we have drowsiness, that state when you're almost asleep but still semi-aware of the world. You might feel this way just before falling asleep, or maybe just as you're waking up. And although drowsiness also comes naturally, just like daydreaming, some people can induce this state of consciousness through deep meditation. And finally, we have sleep. It's a little strange to call this a state of consciousness because it's really more of a state of unconsciousness. You're not aware of yourself or the world around you when you're asleep, even though you might be aware of a dream world. One thing that's pretty cool is that even though you might not be aware of when you shift from one state of consciousness to another, your brain knows. You have sets of neurons that fire rhythmically in your central nervous system, leading to neural oscillations, or just those rhythmic patterns of firing that we can measure. And there's a machine called an electroencephalogram, or EEG, which measures those neural oscillations, more commonly called brainwaves. There are four main types of brainwaves that we associate with different states of consciousness: alpha, beta, delta, and theta. Each of these types of brainwaves oscillates at a different frequency and is associated with a particular state of consciousness. For example, beta waves, which oscillate at about 12 to 30 hertz, which is pretty fast. It means that it's going at about 12 to 30 cycles per second. Those are associated with normal waking consciousness and concentration. So if you maintain this heightened alertness for too long, though, your beta levels get really high and you might experience increased stress, anxiety, and restlessness. Just sort of this constant awake and alertness. Alpha waves, though, are common during relaxed awake states, such as daydreaming or light meditation. As you might expect then, alpha waves have a lower frequency than beta waves. Alpha waves are about 8 to 13 hertz. And although alpha waves disappear as you become drowsy, they can reappear later when you're in deep sleep. When you do get drowsy or you're in deep meditation, an EEG would show theta waves, which are even slower than alpha waves. They're like 4 to 7 hertz. You also see this pattern right after you first fall asleep when you're sleeping very lightly. Sleep as a state of consciousness is surprisingly complex and involves multiple phases of its own and different cycles of brainwaves, including the delta waves, which we haven't talked about yet. So the next video is going to focus on the stages of sleep and what your brain does during those stages. Even though you're not conscious during sleep, your brain is deceptively active. It goes through multiple cycles with distinct brain patterns, and it's very important to your ability to perform normal functions when you're awake. You have 4 main stages of sleep, which occur in approximately 90-minute cycles during a normal night of sleep. The first 3 stages are all considered non-rapid eye movement, or non-REM, which I'm going to abbreviate as N1, N2, and N3. So N1 is the stage between sleep and wakefulness. This is when your brain starts producing theta waves. You might experience strange sensations known as hypnagogic hallucinations, which is kind of a fun name, but these can include hearing or seeing things that aren't there, such as seeing a flash of light, or a lot of people hear someone calling their name, or a phone ring, or doorbell, or something like that. Or if you've been doing something really repetitive just before bed, then that can recur in your hypnagogic state. For example, if you've been on a boat all day, you may still feel like you're on water when you drift off to sleep, even if you're on dry land. Or something that's actually called the Tetris effect. If you've been playing Tetris for a long time right before bed, then you might experience visual images of blocks or something all moving in the same direction, kind of like the blocks in the game. But another common feeling during this stage is a feeling of falling, and that leads to what's called hypnic jerks, or those muscle twitches you sometimes experience as you fall asleep. So that's N1, our first lightest stage of sleep. And then we move into N2, which is a slightly deeper stage of sleep. Although it's still pretty easy to wake up someone in N1, people in N2 are harder to awaken. We see more theta waves, as well as something called sleep spindles and K complexes. So sleep spindles are these bursts of rapid rhythmic brain activity, and there's a lot we don't know about the purpose of each sleep stage and the function of these brainwaves, but some researchers think that sleep spindles help inhibit certain cognitive processes or perceptions so that we maintain a tranquil state during sleep. For example, sleep spindles in some parts of the brain are associated with people's ability to sleep through loud noises. And K complexes are kind of similar, but they're a different type of brain activity that's also thought to suppress cortical arousal and keep you asleep, basically. They're also thought to help with sleep-based memory consolidation, which is the theory that some memories are transferred into your long-term memory during sleep. And what's cool is that even though K complexes do occur naturally, you can also make them occur by gently touching someone who's in this stage of sleep, like just brushing against their skin, and that'll induce some K complex activity. So what your brain does is sort of assess that the touch on the skin is non-threatening, and it suppresses the processing of that stimuli to help keep you asleep. So beyond N2, we have N3, so this is our last non-REM stage, and N3 is also called slow wave sleep because, as you might guess, brain waves are very slow, and these are called delta waves, and they have a range of about 0.5 to 2 hertz, so you get basically a half to 2 oscillations of these brain waves per second. And when you're in N3 sleep, you are very much dead to the world and really difficult to wake up. And if you walk or talk in your sleep, this is the stage where those things happen. So the last stage we need to talk about is REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and that's because this stage is when your eyes move really rapidly beneath your lids. And also, most of your other muscles are paralyzed. So this paralysis might actually be a good thing because most dreaming occurs during REM sleep. So if you weren't paralyzed, your muscles might act out whatever you were dreaming about, which could be unsafe for you and anyone sleeping near you, depending on what type of dreams you have. REM sleep is sometimes called paradoxical sleep because your brain actually seems very active and awake, but your body is prevented from doing anything. It's kind of crazy. Now, in a normal night of uninterrupted sleep, you cycle through these stages about 4 or 5 times each, and it takes about 90 minutes to go through a complete cycle. But the order, it doesn't just go, 1, 2, 3 REM. But the order within a cycle tends to go from N1 to N2 to N3, and then back to N2 before entering REM sleep, and then back to N1, and then it starts all over again. And how long each stage lasts depends partially on how old you are and partially on how long you've been asleep. You tend to do a lot more slow wave sleep or N3 sleep in the first few hours, and then more REM sleep right before you wake up. So that's why if you really want to try to remember your dreams, you can set your alarm to go off a little earlier than usual, like 15 minutes. And so you'll get jerked out of REM sleep and are more likely to remember what you dreamed. You know that you get tired probably around the same time every afternoon or evening, and you might wonder how your body knows when to fall asleep or why a lot of people get tired in the afternoon. The answer lies in something called our circadian rhythms. And just like our sleep has cyclical stages, so does our wakefulness and our transition from wakefulness to sleeping. Circadian rhythms are our regular bodily rhythms across a 24-hour period, which is also called our internal biological clock. And these cycles control our body temperature, which rises during the day and then takes a brief dip in the early afternoon and then goes up again in the evening and then falls during the nighttime. So they control our body temperature and our sleep cycle, all sorts of things. Daylight is a big cue for circadian rhythms, and even artificial light can affect your circadian clock. So that's why when you travel somewhere with a big time difference, airplanes will usually adjust the lights in accordance with the time zone of your destination. They're trying to help you reset your biological clock. But resetting that clock can take time, which is when you experience jet lag. Your biological clock says it's time to go to sleep, but your new time zone says it's time to wake up. And so that transition can be a little taxing if you're traveling. But these circadian rhythms also change as you age, which is why a lot of younger people tend to be night owls. But as they age, older people tend to wake up and go to bed early. And your circadian rhythms can also prevent you from sleeping in when you want to sometimes. So maybe you get up every day at 6 a.m., Monday through Friday, and then Saturday you can finally sleep in, but you'll still wake up around 6 a.m. And that's because your internal biological clock has adjusted to you waking up at that time. So it regulates your metabolism, body temperature, sleep cycles, so that you wake up at the same time.
And let's say that the bit of the iceberg above the water represents our conscious wishes, urges, feelings, and these are the things that we actually know about and that we experience and that we consciously are aware of. But what you can see here under underneath the water, there's plenty more iceberg. And that actually represents the unconscious, our unconscious wishes, urges, and feelings. And it's these unconscious elements
which in turn helps protect against depression, though we're still not. I'm sure we've all had trouble sleeping at one point or another, maybe trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up. Or maybe you're forcing yourself to sleep less because you have too much to do to lie in bed. But sleep deprivation can be a serious issue. People who don't get enough sleep are more irritable and perform worse on memory and attention tasks than people who do. So while this can be just a minor annoyance in everyday life, imagine the long-term implications for, say, airline pilots, firefighters, security officers, or the person driving next to you on the freeway. For example, one study in Canada showed that the Monday after the spring time change, so when people lose an hour of sleep, the number of traffic accidents increases sharply compared to the Monday after the fall time change when people get an extra hour of sleep. The number of accidents decreases sharply. So that's just one example, but sleep deprivation also makes people more susceptible to obesity. When you're sleep deprived, your body produces more cortisol, which is a hormone that tells your body to make more fat. And you also produce more of the hormone that tells your body you're hungry. So you end up eating more and turning more of what you eat into fat, which can contribute to weight gain. And finally, sleep deprivation can also increase your risk for depression. And one theory about this link is that REM sleep helps your brain process emotional experiences, which in turn helps protect against depression, though we're still not entirely sure about this link. Most people experience sleep deprivation at some points in their lives. But the good news is that most people can get back on track by getting a few nights of good sleep, sort of paying back your sleep debt. Your next question might be then, how much sleep is enough sleep? That's kind of a hard question to answer, but most adults need about 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but the exact number varies by individual and by age. Babies need a lot more sleep, for example, and older adults can often sleep less than 7 or 8 hours without severe detriments. Again, everyone has trouble falling asleep at some point, but people who have persistent problems in falling or staying asleep have a more serious sleep disorder called insomnia. There are various medications that can help people fall asleep, but taking them for too long can result in dependence and tolerance, which is if a person continues to rely on the medication, then their body will get used to it and they'll eventually need more and more to get the same effects. Now, that can often be a bad thing because there are side effects to drugs, but so treatment for insomnia often involves psychological training as well as, or sometimes instead of, medication. And some lifestyle changes might also be necessary. For example, exercise regularly but not right before bed, or spend some time just relaxing before bed. And these can help people with insomnia. On the other end of the spectrum is narcolepsy, which is a disorder when people can't help themselves from falling asleep. So about 1 in 2,000 people suffers from narcolepsy, and most of the time people with narcolepsy will have these spontaneous fits of intense sleepiness, occasionally lapsing into REM sleep. And these fits last about 5 minutes and can occur really anytime. Although the cause of narcolepsy is still under investigation, there are indications that it's genetic, and it's linked to the absence of a certain neurotransmitter that helps with alertness, suggesting that neurochemical interventions may help some people overcome this problem. A more common sleep disorder is sleep apnea, which affects about 1 in 20 people. This one's a little scary because people who have apnea are really unlikely to be aware of it. What happens is that people stop breathing while they sleep. After about a minute of not breathing, your body realizes you're not getting enough oxygen, and you wake up just long enough to gasp for air and then fall back asleep without really being aware of what happened. And this can actually happen as many as hundreds of times each night, which is a lot, and because you're constantly drifting kind of between sleep and wakefulness, you don't really get enough of your deeper stages of sleep. So it prevents you from going into the N3 stage, or the slow wave sleep. Snoring can be an indication of sleep apnea. So if you've ever been told that you snore, and you often feel fatigued in the morning even after what you think is a full night's sleep, then you might be one of the 1 in 20 people with sleep apnea. But it's very treatable, so don't worry. Sleepwalking and sleep talking are the last sleep disorders we're going to talk about. Like narcolepsy, these are mostly genetic. They occur during N3 stage sleep and are usually harmless as long as you don't walk into a dangerous situation or reveal any deep, dark secrets. Sleepwalking and talking occur more frequently in children, partially because children experience more N3 stage sleep than adults. But as you grow, these nighttime adventures become much less frequent. Even though the areas that So far in this tutorial, we've talked about states of consciousness that occur naturally, meaning you don't really have to try to be awake or to fall asleep, but there are some states of consciousness that do require some effort. So now I'm going to talk about a couple induced states of consciousness, hypnosis and meditation. When you think of hypnosis, you might think of the typical Hollywood depiction of some creepy guy who swings a pocket watch in front of people's faces and then gets them to start clucking like a chicken or something else they would never do normally. But don't worry, no one can actually do that to you without your consent. A hypnotist's power rests completely in how open you or the person being hypnotized are to suggestion. And most people are open to some degree of suggestion, at least. For example, try this with someone who hasn't seen this video. Get them to stand up and close their eyes, and then tell them that they're swaying back and forth. So don't tell them to sway back and forth, just tell them that that's what they're doing. And most people, when they hear you tell them that they're swaying, will actually start swaying if they weren't before. But if they know what's coming and don't want to be swayed, then this won't work. It's the same with hypnotism. It usually involves getting people to relax and focus on a particular spot or internal function like breathing. And people become more susceptible to suggestion in this state, but only if they want to. So as you enter into that state of hypnosis, an EEG would pick up more alpha waves in your brain, indicating an awake but relaxed state. And some people use hypnosis to try to retrieve memories, which is kind of dangerous and not scientific, because memory is very malleable, and since we don't record events in our head like a video camera does, sometimes people who supposedly retrieve memories during hypnosis can actually create false memories that incorporate the hypnotizer's leading questions or expectations, even if they don't intend to. And some people also think that hypnosis helps them refocus their attention, which is why it can be used to treat pain. For example, there's some evidence that people under hypnosis have reduced brain activity in areas that process sensory input, even though the areas that receive the sensory input, the sensory cortex, are functioning normally. So this could mean that although hypnosis doesn't completely block out sensory input, it might help inhibit our attention to that input, which enables some people to deal with more painful stimuli than they normally would. But again, the bottom line is that if you think it will work, it has a good chance of working. But if you think it won't work, then you're stuck with the more traditional pain-killing techniques. And another induced state of consciousness is meditation. There are a lot of definitions of meditation, but we're going to focus on the type that involves training people to self-regulate their attention and awareness. So meditation can be guided and focused on something in particular, like breathing oftentimes, or relaxing muscles or something like that. But meditation can also be unfocused when you let the mind wander freely. During light meditation, people experience more alpha waves than during normal relaxation. And then during deep meditation, this is the type that usually only experts achieve, like Tibetan monks, but they have increased theta waves in the brain, which also happen during some sleep stages, but you're still awake. There aren't very many scientific studies on long-term effects of meditation, but some studies do indicate that in people who regularly get into deep meditation, there's increased activity when they're not meditating, increased activity in their prefrontal cortex, right hippocampus, and right anterior insula, suggesting that those people have an increased ability to control their attention, which is the goal of meditation, so that's good. This ability to control your attention could have important implications for people with attention-related disorders such as ADHD, or even people who want to avoid some of the attentional deficits associated with natural aging.
3, 2, 1. So as we continue on this journey and we're looking at really coming into a place of aligning for balance, and we've started talking about dreams and visions and how dreams and visions can actually play a role in how balanced we are in our boss energy, and understanding again this idea that we want to come into a full awareness of who we are, how we operate, whether it's our elements, whether it's the dreams and visions that come that help us align our balance and maybe even connect us back to our spirituality in areas that we've not been very alert and conscious of in our journey up to this point. We want to continue this journey down the road of saying, how can I come into dreams and visions where it helps me to align myself for balance, to really be completely and totally connected to the universe in which I live. I keep saying that we are stardust wrapped in flesh. I'm going to continue to say that because I want you to come to this point where every time you think about yourself, you understand everything that the universe is made of. The stars in the sky, everything that is on the earth, whether you talk about ground, water, whatever, we're all made out of the same elements and thereby interconnected. I'm going to keep pushing this concept even when we start talking about the extended sensory perception of dreams and visions, that because all of this is interconnected, and we're talking about frequencies, we're talking about elements, we're talking about all of these things, the states of matter. We're talking about all of these things that are so intricately connected together that then it allows us to come into a place of moving into dimensions, if I can call it that, and realms that we have the capacity to operate in, but until we reconnect, we'll continue to miss these opportunities. So today, as we talk about dreams and visions, I want to really begin to deal with this concept and this idea that I want you to really look at what needs to happen for you to come into the awakening. Three, 2, 1, go. Now, the awakening is a part of dreams and visions. If you're having dreams and visions, understanding that typically we would expect that a person that is dreaming, unless they're daydreaming, that a person that's dreaming is in a state of sleep. And yet and still, we look at the idea, you sleep and have the dream, but there must be an awakening to actually execute that dream and to bring it forth. So then what steps will we go through before we come to our awakening? That's where today I want to talk about the sleep cycles and use that as an analogy. Now, we have 4 cycles of sleep that we're going to identify. The first one being in REM stage 1, N being non and non-REM stage 1, which deals with transition periods between wakefulness and sleep. The transition periods that exist between wakefulness and sleep. Then we want to look at NREM2, and what does that entail? That deals with the area where your body temperature begins to drop and your heart rate slows down and the brain begins to produce sleep spindles. Now, I'm going to show you a video in a minute that will help to explain what exactly that means. But just remember, body temperature's dropping, heart rate is slowing down. This is what's going on as I experience NREM stage 2. Then we've got NREM stage 3, where your muscles begin to relax and your breathing rate drops even further. And this is where your deepest sleep occurs. And then last but certainly not least, we have the REM sleep, where your brain becomes more active, your body becomes immobilized. And this is critical. A lot of times people don't realize this. Your brain becomes very active, but your body becomes very immobilized. You'll hear the person in the video talk about this as the paradoxical state of sleep. The paradoxical state of sleep, that where you think the mind is so active, you would think the body becomes extremely active. But no, it's a paradox. It's where the mind becomes extremely active, but the body becomes completely immobilized. And they'll explain that as well in the video as we get there. But this is where dreams occur and your eyes move very rapidly. This is why they call it rapid eye movement in this particular stage. Now, again, I want to pull out the significance even before we see the video. I want to pull out the significance of the paradoxical stage that we're talking about in REM, where the mind is going a mile a minute, and we see that manifesting the dreaming going forth with the rapid eye movement. But again, understanding that the body is in a state of being immobilized and paralyzed. This significance I want us to understand and take this to heart as we start talking about dreams and visions. I want you to understand that even that dream that happens in your life, whether we take it first natural or whether we take it to the spiritual, at either of those junctures, I want you to understand when your dream is at its most active, your body and your state of movement and doing things is limited and restrictive. So this is a paradox I want you to get down in your mind, because again, so many times we think about dreams. I got to get out here and I got to run. I got to get out here and I got to do this. You cannot execute the dream and the vision until you have the awakening. So what, again, steps do we go through before we come to our awakening? That is why today we're going to stop and take some note and pay attention to the 4 stages of sleep. Today, we're going to actually stop and look at some videos about dreaming, sleeping, and understand how all of this comes together to work and create what I want you to take away from here today. I want you to put this in the spiritual perspective. I want you to put it in the perspective of knowing yourself, seeing your stages and phases as you walk through them. Three, two, one, talk. So I hope you're able to get the takeaway that I hope that will help you to understand and be able to visualize the concept that I'm saying here. So as we look at all of these different things, and as we look at what has been presented in the videos, so today we're going to deal with, in the videos that are coming, you're going to deal with states of consciousness. That's what we're going to deal with first. Then you'll see a video on Now, as we look at these videos, I'm going to show you a series of videos, and this is where we're going to draw our information from on today. The first video that you're going to see is going to be on states of consciousness. The second video that you're going to watch will be on sleep stages and the circadian rhythms. Then we're going to deal with sleep disorders. And lastly, we'll talk about hypnosis and meditation in that order. Again, we'll talk about states of consciousness, sleep stages and the circadian rhythms. We'll also talk about sleep disorders. And lastly, we'll talk about hypnosis and meditation. So, as we've seen in the video, I hope that you're clear on understanding how the circadian rhythm and how your sleep stage and your pattern, rather, your sleep cycle, how all of these things come together to really bring your body into the place of being able to function at its premium and optimum, to get yourself from the place of being stressed out, drug out. This sleeping cycle, and again, anything that's a cycle, it goes around and it continues. What goes around comes around, and it goes around and comes around again. I want you to understand, when we look at the circadian rhythm and we understand, even as they talked about, yes, initially when you go to sleep, you have how often, okay. So we've got the sleep cycle. Now the sleep cycle is also regulated. Okay. So you have your sleep cycle. Your sleep cycle is also regulated by your circadian rhythm. Now, what do I mean when I talk about the circadian rhythm? As you saw in the video, there is an amount of time that you're alert and awake. There's an amount of time that you're asleep. All of that is determined by that circadian rhythm that you have. So this is something not only in the natural, but also in the spiritual. I want you to identify, what is my circadian rhythm in the natural, but I even more so want you to identify, what is my circadian rhythm in my spiritual space? What is the space of time when I go through my sleep cycle and then actually segue over to my alertness, to the time when I'm very alert? Again, coming to this point where I'm coming into the awakening. How and when and where am I able to identify these different cycles and how they cycle through in my life, not only in the natural, but I'm pushing you to understand, how do these cycles regulate through in your world in the spirit realm? Because again, much of what I'm talking about when I talk about boss energy is to push you into this place where you can have a boss energy all the time that just permeates your being, because you are in that place where you're constantly living the boss energy path. It's that cycle where I rest. It's that cycle where then I become alert and take the dreams that I've had while I was resting, while I was refreshing, and I put them into effect. So when I look, and I hope that you heard this in the conversation, my mind immediately went to the conversation that she brought out, that particular point, that in infancy, an infant spends way more time in REM. Now let's look at that for what it is. And why is that? This birthing, after having been all for 9 months of time in utero, after having 9 months of time in darkness, after having 9 months of time in the womb, after having 9 months of time in water, after having 9 months of time of having that umbilical cord connected to the mother, and that's your source of existence, there comes the birthing where you come out of the uterus and you are now birthed into a strange and foreign land, and you're expected to live, thrive, and be productive in this strange and foreign land. That being understood, it makes sense to me that the baby comes out sleeping the majority of the time and having a bulk of REM, rapid eye movement, that goes on with that baby. Because what happens in rapid eye movement, that is that place where the body is able to repair itself. It's that place where the body is able to recoup itself. It's that place where the mind is at its highest peak of work, but it's also at that place where the body comes into that place of being immobilized and paralyzed, if you will, to give it rest. So if we take that from the natural and pull it over into the spirit, when you come into this spirituality of boss energy, understand that when you first come into it, and you may be a baby in this, don't be surprised if you spend more time in your sleeping in that rapid eye movement phase. Again,